Oh, so it's been about 8 days since the Western States 100 endurance run. And so today I want to tell you my experience of the Western States 100. And off the bat, I'll tell you I did not finish. This was my very first DNF for the 100-mile distance. But I think there's a lot I learned from running this race. And I want to go over things that went well, things that did not go well, and then go over. And then I want to go over um, the elevation profile compared to another race, and finish up with some positive aspects that I got from running the Western States, the first part of the Western States, I should say. All right, so what went well? The first thing I want to say that went well is my training. So I've done 5 100-mile races in the past, and I want to say by far the training I did for the Western States was the best training. I was well prepared going into this race, without a doubt. The second thing that went well is how I prepared for the heat. There were predictions of the weather to be very hot in Auburn for that weekend. At one time, they had a prediction of a high of 108. So I was a little nervous about the heat going into this race. So what I did in preparation is whenever there was a hot day in June, I would do my 7-mile run in the heat. And that, I believe, worked. I got to a point where I could run the 7 miles and feel pretty comfortable. I'm a person who does not like to run in the heat. So to train myself to do that I think, was a success. I also had a plan to deal with the heat during the race. I won a tumbler from my running club at work. And what I did is I filled that with ice. So it would keep the ice cold for about 3 or 4 miles, or probably longer than that. So what I would do is at the aid stations, I had this bandana that I folded in half and sewed up the sides. And then I was able to put ice in the bandana and wrap it around my neck. It's a trick that many ultra runners have. If there was, let's say, 6 miles to the next aid station, so halfway, I was able to refill my bandana with fresh ice. And I believe that helped a lot. I think that worked because I felt pretty good handling the heat on race day. So what did not go well? And the first thing that didn't go well is my hotel room. Now, I have to say Squaw Valley is an awesome resort. I mean, it's wonderful. And the staff there, they're wonderful. It was great. But when I arrived, my room wasn't ready. So they found another room for me that just so happened it was above the Irish pub. and so Thursday night, what I tried to do is just sleep at East Coast time and wake up really early so that on race day, I'd need to wake up at 3 a.m. for the 5 a.m. start. I'd be fresh for that. So I tried to go to bed early Thursday night, but in the bar, they had bingo going on. Now I could hear the people chatting and laughing and telling stories, whatnot. But and I'd get ready to fall asleep, and then all of a sudden, bingo, and it would jar me awake. Now I brushed that off on Thursday night, thinking like, okay, maybe I don't get good sleep tonight, but I'll get good sleep on Friday night. Thinking that because this event is for Western States 100, where the runners will probably want a good night's sleep on Friday night, they wouldn't have anything going on in the bar on Friday night. But I was mistaken. On Friday night, they had a live band going on, and it seemed like they did take measures to quiet the band down around 10 o'clock, but you could still hear this background music going on until about midnight. So I didn't sleep until midnight. So that night I had about 3 hours of sleep before the race. And so I arrived feeling a little groggy going to the start, but I also had that rattling around in my head, thinking about the lack of sleep I had for the last 2 days. So that didn't help. Now, the next thing that didn't go well, or I shouldn't say didn't necessarily go well, but messed with my mind, are the signs that they had at the aid stations. Is they had these signs that would tell you what the cutoff is for 24 hours, the cutoff for 30 hours, and the overall cutoff for the race. And so you had to make that overall cutoff to continue forward. And I'm going along 15 miles into the race, and I'm feeling pretty good. I'm running the flats, running the downhills, hiking the steep inclines. So I feel I'm doing good. And I look at that sign and I say, okay, the cutoff is 9:10. I believe this is at mile 15, and it's 9 o'clock. That's for the 30-hour cutoff. And I'm like, what's going on? I'm 10 minutes ahead of the 30-hour cutoff. I'm not doing anything wrong. What's going to happen at 2 o'clock in the morning when I'm exhausted? I'm running much slower. So that got inside my head and messed with me a little bit. Another thing that happened that I wasn't quite prepared for is the way they handled the aid station for provisioning food. They wanted to be a little more sanitary, which I appreciate very much. But I'm a person who doesn't like to waste food. So what they would do is when you arrive, they'd ask you what you want, and they'd take a cardboard plate and fill it with what you asked for. So if you asked for potato chips and pretzels and watermelon, they'd give you a big handful of potatoes, chips, big handful of pretzels, and a couple of watermelon. And so you had this plate with more food than you could possibly eat. Now, when I normally arrive at the aid station, I usually take a couple potato chips, 1 or 2 potato chips, 1 or 2 pretzels, and nibble a little bit. And because I don't want to overeat because that'll make me sick. So I can't hold down the food. So I need to kind of eat in moderation. Now, because I don't like wasting food, I found myself with this plate of food and stuffing the pretzels and the potato chips in my vest pocket because I didn't want to waste it. And then I continued on the aid station, and then I started eating the potato chips. And I was thinking, this probably isn't healthy because my vest is, I've run on so many long runs that it's probably contaminated. I'll get botulism or something. I don't know. So I ended up throwing out the potato chips and the pretzels at the next aid station, um, and just tried to get them to give me smaller portions. So that was the food. But overall, the first part of the race was going relatively well. Now, the next thing I want to go over is what was going through my mind. And I want to compare it show you that by showing you the profile of both the Western States and another race I ran that I think was very similar, the Zion 100. So here is the profile on top is the Western States 100. The profile on the bottom is the Zion 100. And what I found very interesting is how the profiles are very similar, the races at the first 43 miles, and I ended up dropping at 43. So if you look at the beginning here, Western States, this is a 4-mile climb up the escarpment to the top where you have that wonderful view. I mean, it's unbelievable view at the top. And then on Zion, you have this incline that you have to do to climb to get to the top of the mesa. And then you get wonderful views at the top of the mesa as well. But it's not quite as long, but it's probably is a little more steeper. It's a little steeper. But I think very similar. And then the other thing that I didn't do well is study the profile of the Western States beforehand, because all these little jagged tooth marks here are all pretty significant inclines that you have to hike up. I wasn't prepared for that. I'm thinking along the course here is like, what did I do this course backwards, where it's a net uphill because of all these uphills that you have to kind of go through. So it'd be good just to be prepared for that. I don't think it had much of an effect on my legs, but it's there. And on Zion, although they didn't have as many inclines, they did have these giant boulders you had to run on that just wore me out and tired me out. So by mile 43, I was pretty exhausted. But as you can see at 43, I had a steep downhill to get off the mesa, and then I want to say at least 15 miles of running in the desert. So mentally, I was kind of prepared for that. I knew night was coming, so it was going to be a little cooler. Running downhill down the mesa didn't seem too intimidating. However, Western States was much different. So Western States, the thing about Western States is that a lot of this running in the high country, you're exposed to the sun. So the heat became an issue. And down here is a river that you're able to lay down in to cool off before you go up this incline to Robinson Flat. Now this incline is entirely, I think entirely in the heat. You're exposed to the sun. So this got hot. And this is where my backup plan of having ice available helped out quite a bit. So having my tumbler available with ice helped out significantly because I was able to refill my bandana going up Robinson Flat. And by the time I got to Robinson Flat, I felt pretty good. I was starting to feel the effects of this race and the climbs, but I was doing okay. Now running down to the next aid station, Miller's Defeat, I stopped to get some help from the volunteers because I started to feel a little tired, and I was thinking ahead to Devil's Thumb, which I don't have on the list here. It's the next aid station or the next climb after Last Chance. And I knew that was going to be significant where the temperatures could get up over 100 degrees in the canyon. And then you have a 2-mile steep incline to go up. And I was talking to him about that I wanted to get some rest and make sure that I was well prepared for that section of the course. The volunteer told me, I think rightfully, that not to worry, to continue on to Dusty's Corner. And then you get a 5-mile decline to Last Chance. And at Last Chance, you can do what you need to do to get prepared for Devil's Thumb. So I continued on to Dusty's Corner, feeling okay. And then at Dusty's Corner, it's a 5-mile, it's 5 miles to Last Chance. Now, the thing here is this portion of the course is the easiest portion of the course so far in the race that I encountered. It's a gentle downhill, so it doesn't beat up your quads. You're running on pine needles, so it's very soft on your feet, and it's entirely in the shade, almost entirely in the shade. So there's no reason to complain during this part of the run. But I was running for about 2 miles after Dusty's Corner, and then I got to a point where I started to feel a little nauseous, and I could run for 3 steps, and then I'd get nauseous, lightheaded, and I'd be forced to a walk. And I ended up just gave up running altogether and said I'm going to just walk to Last Chance. And this is where I think I made my critical mistake in running the Western States 100. There's this quote by Henry Ford that if you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. And what I said to myself at this point is I think I have to quit. So I set my mind up thinking that I'm going to drop out of the race. And it was pretty set in my mind that I was going to drop out. So I arrived at Last Chance, and this is the aid station prior to a steep 2-mile decline, and then a 2-mile climb onto Devil's Thumb. Now, when I arrived at the aid station, I had a difficult time telling the medical volunteer that I had to drop, but the medical staff there wouldn't let me at that point. They said, we're going to keep your wristband on, because when you drop, what they do is they cut your wristband and then radio ahead to tell the organizers that you dropped and that there's no need to go and get a search and rescue team out to find you. But they were not going to cut the wristband until the cutoff for the aid station. And there was a very helpful volunteer who was also an ultra runner, because this aid station, I think, was organized by a local running club. So this guy had experience and he had an idea. He said, I need to get some calories in me. And he said, um, had something that worked very well for him was mashed potatoes. And so I had the mashed potatoes, ate that, and it caused me to feel very nauseous. And they immediately tried to get me on a cot so I could lay down with my feet up. And I think this helped my blood pressure at the time. But and then I threw up everything I had. And they have an ultra running, they call that letting the demons out. So I was releasing the demons at that point. And when you do that, you actually feel a little better because a lot of times when you get sick from running 100 miles, it's because your body's having a hard time digesting the food. Um, so when you do get sick, it actually makes you feel a little better. And so I did feel a little bit better after that, but my mind still wasn't thinking properly on how to finish this race. Instead of thinking like making it to the next aid station, that's a tactic that I often use in running hundreds. Is I don't think about finishing the race. I think about getting to the next aid station. What do I need to do to get to the next aid station? And those type of thoughts are actually positive. You're thinking about success. You're not thinking about failure. What I was doing at last chance is I was constantly thinking about failure. I was thinking like, well, if I can't run those last 5 miles, then I probably can't run up Devil's Thumb, that steep incline. I probably can't do that. So that was still weighing on me. And so I really needed that um, positive motivation. Now there was two things that were different with the Western States 100 and other 100 milers that I've run in the past. And the first is that all the other 100 milers I ran were qualifiers for the Western States 100. And they were all qualifiers for the Western States 100. So when I got ready to quit one of those hundreds, I thought like, well, I'd be disappointed that I won't get a belt buckle for that race and won't have that sense of achievement for finishing that 100. But I also will lose my chance for the lottery for the Western States 100. So there's two big races that I'd lose out on if I drop. So that motivated me to move forward. The other thing that's a little different with the Western States is my next race, my next 100-mile race is actually in 2 months for the Wasatch 100. So when I'm sitting at this aid station at last chance, I'm thinking like, well, what if I do more damage trying to continue on in this race and miss my where I'm too injured or hurt that I won't be able to run the Wasatch 100. And so I was thinking I was making a strategic decision to quit, which I really didn't have good evidence to do. The only, as far as my legs were concerned, I only had a slight um, little tightness in my hamstring. And that often happens when I do a long run of 30 and 35 miles, where it usually goes away. So that really wasn't a good excuse. And the other thing that was going through my mind, I made a mistake, and it was probably more of a mental mistake than a physical, even though it sounds very physical, is on Thursday night before the race, when I arrived at Squaw Valley, or Thursday during the day, I I ran up the escarpment. I didn't run all the way. I ran about 3 miles to the observation point, and then ran down. And that put a little bit of um, strain on my legs that I probably didn't need before the race. But I had in the back of my head that that was a bad mistake and I shouldn't have done that. Um, and so I was thinking that at last chance as well, that maybe I put too much pressure on my legs and this is going to derail my Wasatch 100. But really, I think the biggest issue at last chance were all those wrong thoughts. What I should have done is thought about making it to the next aid station. However, I had to do that. I remember my prior to my first 100 miler, which is the Vermont 100, is I had no idea what it was going to be like to run for 24 hours straight. I'm a person who likes my sleep, so running through the night is kind of unimaginable. So I made a pact with myself that when things get really bad and I want to quit, if I could move forward, I'd continue to do that until I hit the cutoff, and and at that point I'd be forced to drop. I think that advice would have worked well for the Western states. That just to keep moving forward. The aid stations are only 4 or 5 miles apart, so yeah, it would be a slugfest maybe going through those 5 miles. Um, but at least I tried. I think I would have felt a little better, knowing that I gave it everything I had. Um, Hindsight. Now I will tell you, for about I would say 2 or 3 hours after the race, I was 100% convinced that I made the right decision on dropping. And about 4 hours after that, I said, no, I made a mistake. I really let my mind take me out of the race. And I shouldn't have done that. Um, I should have kept that positive thought. Now, I will admit, like if things were really bad, like I had a sprained ankle, I think it's perfectly fine to drop, but I don't think I was quite there yet. Like you might think because I got sick and I threw up at the aid station, that might be a good excuse, but really in hundreds, I think you have to expect that that's going to happen to you. Yeah, the food's just not gonna, because you're running, trying to digest the food. It's in the heat. It's probably not gonna. It's not always gonna agree with you. You gotta continue on. So that's that. So now I want to talk about some of the positives of this race. And the first positive I want to say is that volunteer that took me back to, or took me to the finish line in Auburn. He was a runner who's been I think, volunteering for the Western States 100 almost since it began. He ran it, I think, 4 times. He had a couple of DNFs himself, and it was great hearing his stories. So he had a unique perspective. And then as we're going back on these dirt roads that are very narrow, and you could look. It was to my right. We were actually following the course, so he was able to give me like this guided tour of the course of the Western States 100, of where Devil's Thumb is, and where the canyons are, and certain points on the course. So that was nice. And he brought me through Forest Hill, which is a kind of a famous spot where you can pick up your pacer for the race. So that was nice. And then he brought me to Auburn. And we arrived at Auburn, I'd say probably 10 minutes after the first person finished, which was Jim Walmsley. So I was going to get an Uber and go back to my hotel, but the Ubers require a mask. And I wasn't thinking straight, and I didn't have my mask with me, but I did have a bandana that I think would pass as a mask. But for some reason, I think maybe there's a higher power that made me blank that out, because I ended up staying. I ended up staying at the track, and able to watch many of the finishers finish. One thing I did is I slept on the infield of the track, and then they would announce the next runner as they come in, to wake up and cheer them on. And as the runners are finishing, they're telling a little bit of a story of the runner. They're telling them what an interest they have that's not related to running. They're telling them the people they want to thank for helping them through, and they're also listing the races that they've run to get into the Western States. And it's really touching, especially when you have the experience of running 100, because for each of those people who crossed the finish line, you you understand what they went through. You understand all the training they had to do to complete the qualifiers, even, never mind the Western States 100 itself. So, and this is, sometimes it's a multi-year dream for many people. For myself, it was the 10-year dream to get into Western States. So not to finish hurt, but to see these other people finish was heartwarming. So I stayed all night on the track watching the finishes. And I want to tell you one more story that's kind of interesting. I got a little chilly when I was on the infield during the night. So they have these concrete stands. Uh, so I went up to the concrete stand and I laid down on the concrete, and it was kind of warm from the heat of the day. It didn't release that heat, so I was like, oh, I can lay down here and keep a little bit warmer. And as I'm laying there, I'm hearing some. It sounds like high school kids talking. I'm like, it just seems kind of odd. I'm like, I wonder who they're waiting for. There's a high school kid out there running or something. And I kind of brushed it off. And then as the morning came around, more and more high school kids started showing up. And then as you kind of like overhear the conversations, sounds like they're football players. So I'm thinking like, what are they going to have? Football practice right after the Western States? What's going on here? And then as I'm about ready to leave, this is like 28 hours from the start of the race. I'm about ready to get my Uber and go back to the hotel so I can get some sleep. I hear the kids starting to cheer and all come together in the infield. And it just so happens that their coach, their football coach, was running the Western States 100, and they're there to cheer him on. Now, this is the high school coach of the team that plays on the field where the Western States 100 finishes. So that was quite the heartwarming experience. So I really enjoyed that part of the race. So having these, it was kind of a bittersweet finish for me that I got to see all these people finish the race. Seeing them do that, it's almost like you're finishing yourself as each of these runners finish. I really, but not quite. but that's my story. I do have a lot of regrets, but I am looking forward to the Wasatch, and I hope that other people will view this video in the future and understand your mindset when you're about to drop. Because a lot of times your mind is extremely powerful. So if you're thinking about success, you're thinking about that next aid station, getting to that next aid station, you'll probably continue on. But if you're thinking about quitting, you'll probably quit. So you want to try and keep that thought of dropping out of your mind and keep moving forward. So that's my story, and thank you for listening. Oh my God, this is so beautiful.